When I decide to run for governor of Utah, I will have one campaign promise, and it will be to rename the state Mormania. You guys ever had Mormons show up on your doorstep? It's hilarious. There's usually two of them. They're like songbirds or titties. You know, they come in pairs. And these two Mormons show up on my doorstep, and I got the one Mormon to admit to the other Mormon that he jerks off all the time. We gotta get the hell out of here. This is what blasphemy. Oh. I felt like I won a prize. It was like, awesome, yeah! And if you're religious and it makes you happy, be religious. Life is hard to be happy. Fucking go with it. Just don't get mad if someone else, that's not how they get happy. That's all I'm saying, you know? And the Mormons, they seem like you gotta squint the most to buy their fucking crazy shit. Like, it's this, really, what? It just seems like it was made up on the spot. Like Brigham Young back in the day was like, all right, that's what I have to say. And some skeptic stands like, wait, what was the name of your prophet again? And he just panicked, prophet, Joseph. What was his last name? Oh, fuck, Smith. Yeah, Joseph Smith is our Lord and Savior. Like, what? And everyone's like, clearly this is bullshit. And they all stand up to leave. He just panics and gives away the farm. He's like, you can have as many wives as you want. Everyone's like, we're in. Let's do this.
You got to thank the Lord, right?
I'm actually an atheist.
There is absolutely no doubt that atheism will win hands down.
If I were in a situation where I could stop a child rapist, I would. And that's the difference between me and your God.
Welcome to Atheist Avengers Radio with your hosts, Agent Wyatt Mathers and Major MacGuffin. Our continuing mission is to explore our world, to seek out injustices and oppressive ideologies, to leave science and reason in our wake, fighting for justice, truth, and equality for all. We are here to inspire the next generation of godless heroes, avenge the harms of religion, educate the uninformed, and ensure the well-being of all individuals by defending the separation between church and state. The Atheist Avengers. Because together, we can change the world.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Atheist Avengers. Today, we decided to take a little turn from talking about Christianity to talk about the other cult. I know that Mormonism is considered Christianity, but
no, it's not.
It is way out there as far as we're concerned. So to get a little better perspective, we thought we'd bring on a couple of people who knew a lot about it. Major Mike, who do we have today?
Well, in studio today, we have Neil Winters. I'll just let him speak for himself. Who the hell are you?
Neil Winters obviously is a pseudonym. You may know me from the Unequally Yoked Podcast with my wife, who is a believer, Naomi Winters. I'm former Mormon. We have taken that podcast down. I think we're going to be putting it back up again. But we did a podcast on the complexities of living in an interfaith, actually believing in non-believing marriage. And that's who I am. Former Mormon. Haven't believed for about 7 or 8 years now.
All right. And joining us via Skype is Bryce Blankenagel.
Edit.
Bryce.
It took me a while to get it down to you. Don't worry, dude.
Well, I know that Jake Farwarton always makes fun of your name too. Bryce Blankenagel from the
well done.
Naked Mormonism podcast.
Yes, sir. That's me. How's everybody doing today?
Well, we're doing great.
Yeah, we're drinking. We're doing fine.
And it came to pass.
Hey, it's after 12 o'clock on Sunday. We're allowed to drink, right?
It's Sunday. You're allowed to drink.
That's right.
So we'll just start this party off here. There's a lot that I understand about Pentecostal Christianity because I grew up in it. And I understand how crazy that is. But there's a lot to Mormonism that I don't understand, that I haven't seen. But you guys used to live it. So I understand my fundamentalism when I was in it and how I came out of it and the steps that I took and the journey that I took. But yours is quite a different journey. honestly. So we just kind of wanted to get you guys to kind of talk us through that. How did it work for you? Where did you come from? If you want to talk about how did you, obviously you grew up in Mormonism. You were raised in that, which I was in the church. So just tell us about your history and how you got where you're at. We'll start with Neil Winters.
Well, I want to make one clarification first, which if there are any Mormons listening, will be pissed off about me saying Mormonism is not Christianity.
Yeah,
it is. It is very different. Mormons have co-opted the word Christian to mean believing in Christ. Whereas Christianity in and of itself has a completely different definition of Jesus. I mean, we don't need to get into all the nuances, but I experienced Christianity for about a year after I left Mormonism and learned firsthand that
it's very different.
It's very different. And it's not, I don't consider it bad or like disparaging to the church to say that. I consider it more of a statement of fact.
Mm-hmm.
Like they are fundamentally different from Christianity.
Well, I don't know if this was something I was taught that was wrong, but I was always taught that Mormons didn't want to be considered Christians.
I would say they used to not. Go ahead, Bryce.
Yeah, used to. They didn't. In Brigham Young days, he tried to distance himself a lot from a lot of other Christian sects, and a lot of the things that Mormons today believe are just vestigial traits of what Brigham Young introduced. But as Christianity has become more mainstream and it has been more of the majority, Mormons have tried to be less contradictory to that in order to be part of the accepted in-group, I guess. It's kind of this idea of like, initially they're like, yeah, we could totally be better than those Christians, and now...
Uh-oh.
Did we lose him?
I think we
Let's just join them.
Oh, go ahead. We cut.
And this
cut
is
out.
kind of what led me kind of out of the church too. Was I started debating with a buddy. Okay, sorry about that. This is kind of what got me talking or got me researching Mormon history initially. I was debating a buddy of mine that's Christian, and he was saying that Mormonism isn't Christianity. And of course, I was raised. It's the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Of course, it's fucking Christian. Are you kidding me? But, he started debating me on finer points, and I realized how much I didn't know about it, and that got me started to do some research on it. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I mean, you said it perfectly. I don't know who said it here, if it was Neil or what, but, it's more a statement of fact that it's just not Christian. They've been just trying to include themselves inside that group of Christians to be more part of the mainstream.
Well, it's interesting because the groups that have broken off from Mormonism, from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints Mormonism, still try to call themselves Mormon, and yet the church has come out with very explicit statements saying they are not Mormon, they are not part of us. So they want to have their cake and eat it too. They want to be considered part of Christianity, but they don't want anybody who self-identifies as Mormon to be included in their little tent. So, come
on. It's all just a business move, right? I mean, consider yourself like McDonald's, right? If you're McDonald's and you have a break off McDonald's that advertises itself in the same vein, but also, just by its practice, has, the people that work there have a bunch of wives and fuck children, you're going to want to distance yourself from that McDonald's, right?
Yeah.
Same thing.
Good point. So back to your question. What got me out of the church? Is that what the question was?
Yeah, just kind of your journey in general.
Okay, so I was I had started intellectually having issues with the church when I learned about evolution in college. When I learned about
damn college,
I know when I learned about it in high school, I was convinced that it was a false concept brought up by Satan himself. And then after I got home off my LDS mission, went to college and had a really good biology teacher and started learning about it, and got to the point where I felt like I had prayed and knew of the Spirit that it was of God, and that the temple even alluded to evolution being real. Yeah, seriously, that's where I was. That's cognitive dissonance at its best, because the temple says nothing about evolution, but having realized that I believed in it, I had to somehow reconcile the reality of evolution to what I believed was reality of Mormonism. So that kind of started me on my path back in like 2000. And fast forward to 2008, reading the Book of Mormon. And I don't know about you, Bryce, but when I read it, I used to always think, oh, there's no way Joseph Smith could have thought of these concepts himself. They all seem so real.
Right.
And then all of a sudden the thought hit me, you know, just that little foot in the door. It's possible that this is all made up. And that's where I started down the road. And it didn't help, or it did help, that my wife's brother had left the church when he was a bishop. And so that kind of gave me permission to myself to start questioning, started doing research, like most post-Mormons do. You try and research primary sources because you don't want to read, quote, anti-Mormon literature and be accused of,
Right.
of being swayed by the naysayers. I mean, I read, most of William Clayton's journal, and read David Whitmer's, is it called A Testimony to All Believers in Christ or something? Is that what it's called?
Yep, An Address to All Believers in Christ. It's a two-parter, An Address to All Believers in Christ and Believers in the Church.
Yeah.
And it's so weird because he was one of the three witnesses of the church. But, you know, in that, he basically said the Mormon church is completely off the rails, but the Book of Mormon is true.
Yeah.
It's astounding how he's able to keep that cognitive dissonance in place when he was one of the dudes that saw Joseph Smith talking this thing out of a hat, and he saw the evolution of Joseph Smith from, you know, crazy charismatic dude with an idea turned into a cult leader. He saw that entire transition, and he was still able to say that the genesis of it was true. I don't know how he could square that circle.
Well, the thing that got me, the main thing that I remember from that was a statement that basically said, if you believe me when I tell you I know that I saw the Book of Mormon as being true, you also need to believe me that I learned from the same spirit that Joseph Smith is no longer a prophet.
True.
That really got me.
Now, speaking of prophets, what is this I keep hearing about a modern day prophet? The church has a modern day prophet that they have like every day, or I mean, what is this?
Go ahead, Bryce.
Well, that's something cool about Mormonism is they have modern day prophets to trump the revelation of old prophets. So, you know, if something comes up, that's why the church has been able to ebb and flow and survive as long as it has. As soon as something comes up that's contradictory, or, you know, let's say they have social pressures to change something, like, I mean, in the late 1970s with, you know, blacks getting the priesthood. That was a huge problem, and then they just came down with divine revelation saying, oh, they can have the priesthood, the mark is lifted, everything's good now. And, you know, since they have a modern-day prophet, they can do that. But the problem is, this kind of gets back to what we were talking about earlier. If you say that we have modern-day prophets that can bring about modern-day revelation, you can pretty much anybody can say, hey, I'm a prophet of this church too, and I'm going to go make my own religious sect. Mm-hmm. And since the beginning of Mormonism, since literally the very, very beginning, within the first few months of it starting, people were doing that. People were claiming, oh, Joseph's not the prophet. I'm actually the prophet. So nah. It's my church now.
So how many people used stones to make that proclamation? I mean, it's not done anymore, but at that time, was that pretty much the modus operandi?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, I know there was one revelation with Hiram Page, which was, let's see, I think he was Joseph Smith's cousin or something, or he was related to the Whitmers. He married into the Whitmer family. But he came up with a revelation that superseded Joseph's revelation on where Zion is, basically. And Joseph Smith ordered that the rock be destroyed and that the revelation be burned, because it was obviously from the devil, and anything that came from Joseph's rock, that was all true.
Unless it was publishing.
How ubiquitous people publishing? What? Huh?
Unless it was selling the copyright, then it wasn't true.
Yes. Oh, that's right. Yeah. Unless it was, you know, traveling to Canada to sell it. Yep. That might be a revelation from man or Satan instead.
Wait, now I feel like you Mormons are like ex-Mormons are inside information here. What are y'all talking about?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. I'm like, what the hell are you guys talking about?
Wait, there's an inside joke here. You got to let us in. You can't just skim over it and go on.
All right, go ahead and take that one. You'll take it away.
You want me to? Well, you're going to have to correct me. I mean, you're so basically Joseph Smith wanted money for $8,000 for the Book of Mormon so he could swindle it away from Martin Harris, who published it. And I'm drawing my memory from everything you've said, Bryce. So, but he told his companions go up to Canada because they're going to pay $8,000 for this Book of Mormon for the copyright. They went up there.
And just stop you. $8,000 back then. I mean, if Joseph Smith was the con man, right, and he was just trying to make a quick buck off the Book of Mormon, this was like the ultimate. Like you have to imagine how much his mouth was watering at this $8,000 price tag that he heard just as a rumor, right? Mm-hmm. And if he was thinking, hey, I can sell this and not have to pay off Martin Harris, that's a win-win for everybody, and I can just leave this life behind and go start my own cult, right? So yeah, it's feasible, I think.
What was his motivation? The publishing, the money, or the starting of the cult? Or all of the above?
See, this is mere speculation. It's hard to speculate on historical motives because anything can happen, right? I think initially it was initially why he wanted to make a religious text was to ease his parents' arguing about religion. And I think he figured if he could bring something forward that they could, agree on, then that would settle the disagreements that his mother and father frequently had, That's, I think any kid would want to find a solution to, try and solve why his parents are fighting all the time. So initially, I think that's why it became religious. But from the very onset, with it being something, gold plates buried in the ground, that was just to get money, right? He just wanted money.
It's a sensational story.
Yeah, I mean, and this opportunity comes up where he can sell this for $8,000, which in today's dollars, I think is like $200 and something thousand. When that comes up, of course he's going to seize the opportunity. I mean, come on. But, later on, I think I don't think he ever expected it to evolve into his own, cult, but it just sort of happened, and I don't think he was opposed to it when it happened.
There's a show called House of Cards. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but Kevin Spacey, in the opening season, talks about how power is so much better than money. Mm. And I think Joseph Smith got the money too, but he got power, and he got a ton of it to lead his. He could criticize one of his leaders, berate him in front of the group. And, something that a normal person would turn around and hit you for. And this leader, Brigham Young, turned around and said, "What would you have me do, Joseph?" He just took it and rolled belly up and had him scratch his belly, basically.
Wow. Yep. And I think Brigham was playing the long game too. I think Brigham understood the power dynamic much more than Joseph ever did. And that comes into light much more when you understand the schism that happened after Joseph was shot. But it's tough to tell, right? I think Joseph was more of a party boy. I think he was less concerned with establishing an empire than he was just partying and having fun, doing whatever he wanted.
Fucking 14-year-old girls.
Yeah.
That's one thing that he wanted to do, yes. But I think Brigham Young was much more sadistic and maniacal about it. He was more business-like about it, a movie villain type.
So I don't want to do any spoilers for where you're going with the Naked Mormonism podcast, but one of the things I've always heard about but know very little about is the Danites. Can you talk about those?
A little bit. Unfortunately, I haven't gotten there in my own research to the establishment of them, so I don't know very much about them, but I'll tell you what I know, basically. So initially, there were things going on, primarily with other schisms, people that were trying to break off and create their own schisms, their own Mormon religions. And they wanted to come up with a solution. Joseph Smith wanted a solution for this. And the answer to this was a secret cabal of men called the Daughters of Zion. And then they realized it was a stupid name and turned it into the Danites. So
a group of men called the Daughters of Zion.
Yeah, right. I'm just as puzzled as you are, but so they were basically Joe's hit squad. That's kind of how they're romanticized. Is anytime there was a problem, he would just sick them on whatever person. But they also carried out a lot of ecclesiastical matters, and when there was a disciplinary council that needed to be held and somebody needed to be brought in or whatever, they would take care of it. They would go arrest the guy or whatever. So they were just the kind of the get shit done guys for Joseph and the church.
They were commissioned to kill William Law, weren't they?
Let me think. I believe that was the case. Yeah. I can't say for sure, but I think so.
His hesitation is kind of like, if he tells you, he's going to have to kill you.
William Law was a person who basically started Joseph Smith's downfall, led to what got Joseph Smith killed.
And he was also not wearing his magic underwear.
And Emma also really, really wanted to fuck William.
All right, so we could talk all day about the history of Mormonism, and maybe we should do a show about that.
Sorry, Wyatt.
No, that's fine. It's all very interesting. I would love to go on, but what I'm most interested in today is you guys and where you came from, and frankly where you're going, because I know there's a certain amount of challenges that you both still face because of the Mormon background. So Bryce, you want to give us a kind of a little, for those of us who haven't listened to your podcast yet, give us a little rundown of where you came from.
Yeah, I was Mormon breeding stock way down the line. Born and raised in Utah. And the reason why I'm pausing right now is I'm thinking about a conversation that I just had with my grandma this weekend. My grandma's very old, and I asked her if I could sit down and record just her memories of early Mormon church, as well as her research in genealogy and where we came from in the church. And turns out in 1835, that's where my family line was introduced to the church, and came across the plains in 1852. And that's it's all the way down the line. It's great, and I love that stuff. Love seeing how close it is to my own lineage. But that's where I was born and raised in Utah, and around the age of 15 or 16, I just stopped liking to go to church, and I stopped going to church. And I kind of told you earlier in the show that I started debating this Christian buddy of mine about Mormonism being Christian or not, and that got me set on this path of research to see what Mormonism really is and what Christianity really is, as well as other religions. I mean, I didn't single them out. I wanted to research a lot of others. And I kind of came to a realization after a lot of research, a lot of documentaries, and watching Ancient Aliens and conspiracy theories, came to this realization where I was like, holy shit, they're all right. All of the religions must be right because it all makes sense. And obviously Joseph Smith was enlightened by the aliens that live on Nibiru, and they come on the 2,900-year orbit, and they pass their knowledge on to him. And then, if we just ascend to the planet Nibiru with these aliens, then we can have our own planet. And, the Nibiru is actually Kolob, and that's where God came from, and Elohim reigns on that planet. And then I came to this realization, of course, all the religions are right. And then 10 seconds after thinking that, I said, that's obviously bullshit. But they can all be wrong. Obviously, they can all be wrong. So, that's when I was like, okay, well, it's a lot easier and logically tenable to call myself an atheist. So that works out a lot easier. And I just realized that all religions are bullshit.
So 10 minutes later, you were an atheist, is what you're saying.
Yeah. I mean, I went from Mormon to Christian to pantheist to I don't even know, to all religionist to atheist in a couple of months' time. But from getting to that pantheist to the atheist, that was about 10 minutes. It's ridiculous.
Damn, what a traveling.
No one can accuse you of not trying everything first. You did your work.
I don't mess around.
So I guess the next question would be, as far as you're moving along, coming out as, or not even coming out. Let's go back to before you came out. Cause I know, Neil, that you had a time where you were thinking this way, but you were not out about it. And I think that runs into, there's a lot of people. I mean, there's people that I talk to on a daily basis that are like, yeah, well, I agree with you, but I can't be out about my beliefs. How did it affect you and your family?
It was tough. That conclusion that I reached at the Book of Mormon might not be true, and started doing that research. I told my wife about it, and her question was, do you still believe in God? And my answer was, I don't know. And when in reality, the answer was no, but wanting to soften the blow, I said, I don't know. And she said, I don't know if I can be married to someone who doesn't believe in God.
That's tough.
I took that as an ultimatum, which she didn't intend it to be an ultimatum, but I took it like that. So I started playing church for the next 4 years, attending every week. I taught lessons in what's called Elders Quorum, which is where all the men meet and talk about churchy things. But I was on the road at the same time, traveling every week of the year almost. And I drink, have coffee, all the big no-nos of Mormonism. So on the weekends,
I'd come home smelling like coffee.
No, on the weekends, I'd come home and look like the perfect Mormon husband. While I was on the road, I lived the life that I wanted to live. And then eventually, about 4 years later, the cognitive dissonance just caught up with me, and I couldn't do it any longer. Something just snapped. My wife asked me to bear my testimony of Joseph Smith to my kids. Testimony is where you tell your kids, I know that the church is true. I know that Joseph Smith is a prophet. Like it's this self-affirmation bullshit that they want you to do.
Right.
She asked me to do it, and I couldn't. I just was like, the Proposition 8 in California had just taken place, and I was getting more and more angry at the church by day. And eventually, and couldn't take it anymore. And she saw me getting more and more miserable, and I think had some compassion and realized that it was doing more harm to our relationship than good for me to play nice.
Well, so good for her. I mean, that's, I know it's been tough on her. I know Naomi, and I've been able to interact with her several times. She's a wonderful person.
Yeah.
And she loves you a lot. I can tell that. But the struggle is inside of her because she's been taught all these years that you now are a bad person just because you don't believe anymore. And you also are not the person that she married.
No,
that's one of the things from the podcast that really struck me a lot is she kept coming back to that. And it's the struggle of wanting to, because of the way she was taught, wanting to believe that, but knowing it's not true.
Right.
Knowing that you are still this person, there's just a different outside to you.
Yeah.
So yeah, and let's put a plug in for the podcasts are going back up. We're actually going to include them on the Reason Alliance Media Spreaker. So we'll have those archived for people to come listen to. And I suggest anyone who's going through this, listen to them. They're great. They actually, I mean, they're heart-wrenching, really, to hear, because you can hear the struggle. And I've said this to you before. It's a great thing that you did them. I know they were tough. I know they were tough for both of you, but I think they help a lot of people. So I'm glad that we're going to be able to put them back up and people are going to be able to listen to them.
Yeah. Bryce is on a podcast called My Book of Mormon, where there's a drinking game where you say when they say words like behold and it came to pass, you take a drink. We decided to incorporate a drinking game into ours, which was every time Naomi cried, you took a drink.
You'd never make it through the end of an episode.
No, you wouldn't.
So
can I actually ask Neil a question or two here?
Sure.
Yes.
I get people sending in emails often because, I mean, obviously I play to a largely ex-Mormon audience, right? And oftentimes I get emails of people saying, I'm in, I don't want to be in anymore, but I know that if I leave, it will be the end of blank, end of my marriage, end of my relationship with my parents, end of my life as I know it, basically. Neil, now that you've kind of gone through the transition, basically, and you're in an interfaith relationship, what advice would you give somebody that is kind of, closeted in like you felt you were, but feels like they want to go through that transition, like they want to go through that process?
That's a very tough question. I would say approach it gently. Be honest though, because the lies and the deceit catch up with you eventually. It's a catch-22 because, at least for me, when my wife found out I was lying all those years, she didn't know if she could believe me over anything anymore. But yet telling her the truth could have ended in the same place. So I would say introduce the concept slowly but honestly. And if you can, include your spouse in the journey.
Well, and I wanted to ask as well, and please, hopefully this will dovetail into it. It seems like oftentimes, I've never had to deal with this before. I left before I ever got in a serious relationship or anything like that. I've never had to deal with it. But could it also be an approach of try not to over sensationalize things or blow things out of proportion? Try to be very realistic and very honest about it in that respect.
Absolutely. My initial approach was to take her all the controversial things and say, see this, see how wrong it is. And basic human psychology says that when you're confronted with something that is that starkly different from what you believe in, you're gonna be more convinced that you're right, essentially. And that was the completely wrong approach. Definitely be honest about your concerns, be gentle, to borrow a phrase from Mormonism, but be gentle in the way you approach it. Don't try and prove them wrong and prove yourself right. That just leads to arguments and damage control. So I would say if you possibly can, gentle. That's the best way I can put it.
Yeah, gentle. Yeah, that's probably very good advice. So listen, I think this is a good time for us to take a break. When we come back, I am actually going to ask Neil a question that I probably shouldn't ask, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So what we're going to do now is we're going to debut a new segment called Secular News and Views That You Can Use. I hope you guys enjoy. We've got a special correspondent, the Reason Alliance media correspondent, Willie Weiner. So sit back and enjoy the secular news and views you can use. We'll be right back.
You are listening to the Atheist Avengers.
And now it's time for secular news and views you can use with Reason Alliance Media news correspondent Willie Weiner.
He's a star, but he didn't get as far as those who idolized his ways and means to prepare themselves to be better human beings. Well, they understood more than he had meant to say in his day, but that's okay.
Howdy, y'all. Welcome to Heathen News and Views You Can Use. I appreciate you folks listening.
But her tactics are so cruel.
My name's Willie, and I'll be your host for these here news and opinion segments, bringing you regular updates and some thoughtful reflections relevant to heathen goats at large, and heathen goats in the good old North State in particular. As everybody in the fucking world now knows, the state of North Carolina wants to check us for lady or man parts before we pee. Boo. Or check our birth certificates or something, I don't know. They also want to block us from suing for discrimination in state court and make sure that nobody makes more than $7.50 in minimum wages. It's called House Bill 2, or HB2 for short. And yeah, the ACLU is suing our asses over it. So open your wallets, North Carolina taxpayers. Everybody from Deutsche Bank to PayPal and Bruce Springsteen, Ringo Starr and Annie DeFranco are shunning us like lepers with syphilis and a bad case of genital warts. But some, like Louis C.K., Cyndi Lauper, Duran Duran, and Mumford & Sons, are using their shows here to support groups like Equality NC, who are dedicated to securing equality and justice for LGBT people in North Carolina. Then, after the porn site X Hamster started blocking North Carolina IP addresses, our Republican governor, apparently struck by Almighty God with a terrible virus that prevented him from speaking publicly about this here issue, he quickly issued an executive order, but it didn't really order very much at all.
Not even pizza.
Not even pizza. But it did make his critics and supporters madder than a wet hen in an NPR tote sack. And then in Fortune magazine, the dean of the School of Business at that there Duke University explained how businesses might be able to make this shit right by acting as change agents. Again, what Ted Cruz is calling a perfectly reasonable bathroom bill that he just don't know too dang much about. Speaking of good old Ted, though, Mother Jones recently published a piece about how some of his advisors were the little-known movers and apparently genitalia inspectors, I believe, behind this damn new law, including Charlotte Pastor and congressional candidate Mark Harris and the Benham brothers. Them are real estate entrepreneurs whose house flipping show on HGTV was canceled in 2014 after some audio was published of them boys describing homosexuals as destructive and demonic. The audio was from a prayer rally outside the Democrat National Convention in Charlotte in 2012. We also learned from CBS News this week that Matt Staver is the guy behind these here anti-LGBT laws that are being introduced in state legislatures around the country. You may have heard of Matt. He's the founder and chairman of Liberty Counsel and was the lawyer for Kentucky Clerk Kim Davis, that there chick who wanted to deny marriage licenses to gay couples. I'm sure everybody remembers how well that worked out in the courts for Kim. So, once again, open your wallets, North Carolina taxpayers. Meanwhile, in Tennessee, the House Speaker has exiled State Representative Jeremy Durham from his offices in other areas of the legislative building, possibly even the women's bathrooms, I'm not sure. The Attorney General of Tennessee recently issued a warning about Durham's behavior, posing, quote, a continuing risk to unsuspecting women who are employed by or interact with the legislature. Seems there's been multiple sexual harassment complaints filed against good old Jeremy by women he interacts with while doing the state's business. But the real irony here, though, is that Jeremy's also the one pushing another transgender bathroom bill through the Tennessee legislature. That's right, a white male pervert in a nice suit trying to keep women and children safe from a black she-male in red lipstick and a crotchless teddy sneaking into the women's bathroom.
I don't think that person's going to sneak.
You think I'm making this shit up, right? Just Google it. And then in national news, the Secular Coalition for America is urging us heathens to herd on over to their website and sign their petition urging the IRS to require religious organizations to file a Form 990 like all other nonprofit organizations have to do. That's the way the government can determine whether or not they're worthy of maintaining their tax-exempt status. And then the Center for Investigative Reporting just released their findings on how little oversight there is of religious daycare centers in many states, often with very tragic results for the kiddies. Their report says that 6 states are particularly hands-off: Alabama, Indiana, Missouri, Florida, Virginia, and, yep, you guessed it, North Carolina. If we're really concerned about protecting children in this state, That'd be a really fucking dandy place to start. Finally, the upcoming short session of the North Carolina General Assembly starts on April 25th. If you live in North Carolina, please head on over to the Secular Coalition for North Carolina's Facebook page and check out their event for information about contacting your state legislators to urge them to repeal HB 2. Don't be gruff, but this motorcycle vagina legislature needs to hear about it from us heathen goats, both old and young. If you're scratching your head about that motorcycle vagina reference, just go on and Google it. But I'm sorry, there ain't no porn involved in that shitty story from back in 2013.
There will be if you Google it.
Well, anyway, that's about it for now. This is Willie signing off, but please remember this. After listening to all of this here first episode of Heathen News and Views you can use, the chances are, even if we all accept Jesus at this point, you, me, and our entire families will probably still wind up in hell. But at least we'll be in good fucking company.
Great thoughts don't come to those who try too hard to interpretate what's going on in the mind's backyard. So I'll leave, lest you think that I'm a hoax, like these other folks in my song. Goodbye so long.
Can I ask you a question that I shouldn't ask?
What is my real name?
No, something I'm interested about, and you do not have to answer this because this is a tough question.
Okay.
Okay.
What position do you and your wife have sex?
No, I think I know that one.
They were Mormons. It's always missionary.
Exactly.
Major Mac, have you not seen the videos?
Oh,
Okay.
yeah.
Oh no, I should.
No,
say
not the
that.
Neil and Naomi videos.
The Mormon porn videos. They're out there. No, something I'm interested in is you spent a lot of years feeling like that if you came out to Naomi that she would walk away.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
At the point you decided it was enough, had you come to terms with that fact, or did you feel like that she was going to be okay?
I had come to terms with that fact. You know, this is kind of a commentary on Mormon culture, and Bryce, you'll probably be able to relate to this. But when you're a kid, a teenage boy, one of the biggest problems is your little factory, and
hormones.
No, masturbating your little factory out.
Oh, okay.
Do not open the release valve, or it never closes again.
Yeah, and it speeds up if you do.
You make Jesus cry when you touch yourself. That kind of thing.
Yeah, but anyway, so there is a video in seminary called "Godly Sorrow for My Sins," where it basically told you need to confess to your bishop and not worry about what other people would think of you. Well, fuck. I mean, if
bullshit. That's fucking bullshit.
Yeah, if I'm going in, my biggest fear as a kid was when I masturbated, telling the bishop and then not being able to take the sacrament and having my mom ask questions why.
Oh man.
Yeah, seriously.
Holy crap.
Okay. I was talking, actually, the part 2 of this is going to air on this upcoming Thursday, but I was talking to a believing Mormon, and he was talking about how, that shame, it's all internal, right? It's only if you decide to internalize it that it actually has any negative effect. And I'm like, dude, that's fucking bullshit. I remember watching a loved one of mine going through some sort of disciplinary thing, and that they were unable to take the sacrament. I remember being their family member, handing them the sacrament tray, and them just grabbing it and passing it on, and wanting so much to ask what is going on. And just, I remember the first Sunday it happened, I just stared at the person in the face like, what did they do?
What did you do?
You don't know. right there, it's like a scarlet letter. That's exactly what it is. It's the Mormon scarlet letter, only it's with white trade Wonder Bread instead.
Well, that's really the point of the whole exercise.
Yeah, and so the point I'm making with this is there's this shame as a teenager and then eventually I got to the point, I talked myself up to the point where it was like, where I said, okay, I don't care what other people think of me. I need to confess to the bishop and make myself right with God and with the church. But there's this inherent shame that goes along with it. I would compare that to the way I felt with telling my wife, like, what you have to get to the point where you are so miserable with yourself that you have to not care about the consequences. And as a teenager, I was so miserable with my guilt that I didn't care about the consequences, or at least I thought I didn't. But fortunately, I never got banned from taking the sacrament. But it was very similar to my marriage. You've got to live with yourself, and you've got to be happy with who you are and not be a miserable wretch for your whole life. I don't know if that was a good comparison or not.
I see. If it would have been me as a teenager, the bishop would have just been like, "Dude, you're back again." Jeez, you were just here 2 hours ago.
I had a bishop do that. He got angry at me, like, "What the hell's wrong with you?" And then I
knowing
asked,
that fucker was out doing it himself. He just wasn't fessing up.
I asked him if he ever did, and he didn't respond.
Of course he didn't.
Because as a teenager,
he's doing it right now.
I thought I was the only one that ever did it. I looked at everybody else in my priest corps and thought, "There's no way they masturbate. I'm the only one that has this problem."
And that's the whole point, is to make you feel like you're the only one. And that you're bad for doing that.
I admire you, Neil, for actually going to your bishop. See, I never had the balls to do it. Because I at age 13, 14, whatever, I got my factory started. And from then on, I mean, it just devolved into a negative feedback loop of me hating the church more and masturbating more at the same time. So it was the equivalent of hate fucking myself. I never bishop because I never wanted to deal with the shame. I was just eventually like, all right, I'm either going to stop going to church or stop masturbating, and one of those is not going to happen.
Yeah, every time I did, I thought I was going to hell. I thought there was no hope for me. I mean, it was the shame that the church puts you through over that normal activity is incredible.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah,
I was just afraid to get caught by my mom. That was the only damn thing I was afraid of. It wasn't the church I had to answer to.
Growing up in church, I mean, they would talk about it and they'd be like, it's wrong and everything. But I never felt any pressure to fess up about it. But I did feel guilty. The church teachings made me feel guilty, but I could hide it easier, I guess, than you could. So sorry about that.
Well, I mean, but you see, to be worthy, or part of Mormonism as a 16-year-old is blessing the sacrament.
You're blessing something.
Yeah, Jesus' blood and body symbols, and to do that, there were many people who said, you can't do drugs and drink or masturbate the night before and then use those same hands to bless the sacrament the next day because they're dirty. So I felt like I had to confess
in more ways than one.
Yeah.
Well, that's what they use hand sanitizer for.
No, I mean, I always licked it clean. I mean, come on. Oh, weird. That got weird. Never mind.
Oh, yeah. Oh, now I'm I gotta get that image out of my head.
No kidding.
Let me get another beer.
I'm glad
salty
you guys
or
are
sweet?
Somebody this funny.
Oh my gosh.
But but do you guys want to talk about like Mormonism again? Mormon history.
Everybody's like, well, now what do we do?
So anyway, like it's difficult to tell your wife that you don't believe. That's where this whole thing started.
Well, going along with that, Neil and Bryce both, I know that when you guys get to that point in the church that you resign, you get excommunicated, or you get shunned or whatever by your family and friends. Neil, did you ever yet resign from the church, or are you still
No, I resigned.
Okay.
I got fed up with it and resigned.
Okay. And have they told your family to shun you or anything?
No. It's been good. But if they listen to the leaders,
right,
they would get the message that they should shun me and not talk to me anymore. Would you agree with that, Bryce?
Yeah, I remember. So I didn't necessarily have it with, like a spouse or a girlfriend or anything. But I did experience it with my friends in high school, right? Because when you're in your senior year of high school, obviously, when a lot of guys are out partying and stuff, that was a time when the really straight-laced Mormons were getting super prepared for their mission, right? They were working part-time jobs to save up the $12,000 necessary for it, right? But they were instructed, basically, if you have any friends that are, a temptation or, make you feel ungodly or something, you need to distance yourself from those people. Mm-hmm. And there were a lot of friends that I felt that distancing happening as it was, as we were progressing through our senior year and, after high school graduation, of course. I just felt myself, being ripped away from these friends that I love spending time with, but I'd say, hey, let's go do something. Let's go, hang out. Let's play some video games or something. And they say, oh, sorry, I can't. Which was the equivalent of fuck off. I'm reading my scriptures. So,
oh wow,
I felt it at just a friends level, definitely, and extended family. Extended family was the biggest one. So. Yeah, but it's all part of it. I mean, Mormonism isn't exclusive in this. I mean, I think that's worth pointing out. I mean, I know we're focusing on Mormonism, but any insular community like this, any specifically religious insular community, they're going to do the same thing. Anybody that's on the outside, they're going to try and excise them from the group. It's just Mormons have a very systematic way of doing that, and it's disgusting. It's offensive.
It is. But the weird thing about, I don't think it's as systematic as like Scientology, but it's more unwritten rules. You would argue?
I would argue against that.
Oh, please do.
Well, so Mormonism, it goes along with this shaming, right? If anybody is doing something that's on the inside that they are unable to take the sacrament or they're disfellowshipped or worse yet, excommunicated, right? They're seen as the outsider that's still, kind of on the inside, right? And there's two ways you can go once you get excommunicated or once you get punished for one of your sins, right? You can either embrace the punishment and embrace the law of atonement and eventually atone for your sins and then go back to church, or you can go the other way and just fall away from the church, basically. And it has to do a lot with the power structure of the church, right? I know Scientology has a very strict power structure, but they just label somebody as a suppressive person, whereas Mormons label it as apostate. It's the same exact thing with different words. But and with Scientology, of course, they have their own disciplinary councils and whatnot. Mormons have their handbook, which you can find online. It's been leaked through, I think it was WikiLeaks or somebody leaked the Mormon handbooks, and they have the actual tenet of what you're supposed to do given any situation, whether it's anything from masturbating to child molestation, the disciplinary resources that you're supposed to employ to make this person feel shameful for their sins and whatnot. But if they happen to go the other way and get, fall away from the church, they are seen as the apostate, as the other. And, the shunning is very real. And I think it is the same or possibly worse than Sea Org and Scientology or, the Watchtower with the Jehovah's Witnesses. Like I said, it's all the same. It's just different words that they use.
See, and I would disagree with you a little bit just because I feel like officially from the church, yes, that shunning is there. But when you come down to the local level, at least here in North Carolina where we live, people still try to include me and make me feel loved. So it's like, to me, there's almost a dichotomy of the official position of what people should do, and then there's the human position of at least the local members here who still want to make me feel included and loved, and maybe it's because they want my wife to participate, but they still try to reach out to me and treat me as a human being. But if they were reading what the higher up leaders said and taking those words to heart, I would be completely shunned.
Well, and that's another thing too is I've had in emails and I've spoken with a number of ex-Mormons. Obviously, most of the times when it comes to a husband and wife or trying to leave the church, usually one leaves the church before the other. And in your case, this is the same thing with you, Neil. And if you continue on a path with your wife, who knows? Maybe she'll leave, maybe she'll stay in. Who knows, right? But I've heard many, many times where the man leaves first. And the church leaders try and they don't say it outright, but they try and kind of plant the bud of an idea in the wife's mind. Hey, if you leave him, then we'll find you another worthy priesthood leader to be the head of your household and to raise your kids. So if a wife is in a very inconsolably sad position where she thinks her whole world is over, like, my husband is turning into an apostate, the whole world is ending, I'm not going to be able to get into the celestial kingdom because he doesn't have the priesthood to call me into the celestial kingdom using my name. I'm going to do whatever is necessary to have a worthy priesthood holder in my life. And oftentimes that does result in divorce. And I think that's where the church is a great disservice to a lot of families and to a lot of people, is serving to drive a huge wedge in between two people that are deeply in love, but just happen to have a disagreement about their faith convictions.
Yeah, it's called leadership roulette.
Damn.
Leadership roulette. Yeah, that's a perfect word for it.
Yeah, because you get some lay leaders who are like, let's provide you resources to work this marriage out, and then you get others like who just are, this marriage is over. You need to get away from him. And it's weird because my wife, I think, has a little bit of cognitive dissonance. No, I know she does, because she still is convinced that I'll be able to get her into heaven, and she doesn't see me as necessary for her getting into heaven. But when you read the doctrine, that's totally inconsistent with what the church teaches.
Well, that's what's great about Mormonism, is everybody believes in their own version of Mormonism. I mean, I just this morning, I got up at 4:30 and I drove for 5 hours in a truck cab with my dad, and he believes in a very nuanced version of Mormonism. And he's actually, right now I'm sitting in his garage, where in the house that they're moving into right now, and he's standing on the outside of that garage, and he's probably heard most of this conversation because I've been talking really loudly, and he understands where I'm at and I understand where he's at, and we have disagreements. But I mean, every Mormon believes in a very nuanced version of Mormonism. And that's the thing, is it's hard to nail down. Like when you're talking to a Westboro Baptist, right? And they say God hates fags. That's a very hard line that you can defend against, right? That's a very hard claim that they can't exactly weasel out and say, okay, well, that's what my church says, but I don't think God hates fags. No, that is the exact tenet of your religion. But Mormonism is so much more nuanced in that way. They believe that everybody is kind of the master of their own revelation that way.
Yep. Yeah, like the whole God hates fags thing. The church officially hates fags, but yet the members, my family included, don't. They think that suppressing them and discriminating against them is wrong. And they're okay with that because we all have free agency and we all have rights to our own revelation. And if a leader says something that you disagree with, then they're just a man. But they could say something in the same sentence that you do agree with, and they're a prophet.
Does that have anything to do
cherry picking? Yeah.
Cherry picking or manufacturing in this case. I mean, they can just wholesale manufacture their own religion, based a little bit on the current Mormon religion, right? They can say, oh, I'm a temple going Mormon, but they don't ever go to the temple. They just have a recommend. They can say, I perform priesthood ordinances, but they haven't given a priesthood blessing in 10 years. They can say all these things that, I believe in this. But when it comes down to actually challenging that, they can say, oh, well, that's not actually what I believe. If my own personal belief, my own personal testimony says that I believe in this. And, it's like stabbing Jello, and there's not really a hard line to defend against.
I just want to share a good experience I had in relation to priesthood blessings. So one of the tenets of Mormonism that Bryce hit on is priesthood blessings, where fathers will lay their hands on their kids' heads and give them a blessing from God based on their revelation. So, my oldest daughter, who actually is here, but she's not listening.
She can hear you.
She probably can. Was really missing having a blessing from her dad. She wanted one. She said, can you give me a blessing? And this was just a few months ago. So obviously I didn't believe. And, I did. I didn't give her one like from God. I just said it was for me, but it was good for her to feel that and to have that experience. And it wasn't like a sacrilegious experience. It was more of a, this has always been something that helped me bond to my children. And I still did it, and not from superpowers, but from just a concern as a father. And I think it was nice.
Well, and was it basically just the equivalent of giving her advice when she came to you asking for advice, only, with the added ritual of putting your hands on her head and putting some oil in her hair? Was it just kind of that?
We didn't do the oil, but yeah, it was basically the equivalent of advice. That's exactly what it was. Yeah. But it was in a way that she was familiar with.
Right. Yeah, in any way that, a parent and a daughter like that can open up a line of conversation, I think is fantastic. And, oftentimes kids won't listen to their parents, right? And I think that's one thing that priesthood blessings are really, really good for, is it's like, oh, well, whatever is going to come out of my dad's mouth right now, because he poured oil on my head and put his hands on my head, whatever he's going to say isn't actually from him, it's from God. So this is, authoritative, and this isn't something that it's not something to incite an argument. It's just advice from God, basically. And, I had plenty of priesthood blessings as well, and I enjoyed them just for that sheer sake of it was a very warm feeling. It was a connection that I felt with my dad that wasn't attained in any other way. And, it's a very powerful spiritual experience, for lack of better words.
That's exactly what I was getting ready to point out. I mean, what did she miss? Did she miss the blessing from God or God's presence?
It was the connection with me.
It was the connection with you. Exactly.
Yeah, there you go.
It's a very humanistic thing that people crave on a normal basis, is that interaction with each other. And a lot of times they use God as the excuse to be able to do that interaction. And as a humanist, I say, why? Why do we need that aspect? Why don't we just cut out the middleman, so to speak?
I'm finding out that ceremony has a lot to do with our interactions as well. So it's not so much of what we're saying, it's how we say it.
Well, it's like people have to create the reason to have interaction. They have to create a reason why they want to get together on Sunday. Why do we have to do that? Is it just because it's ingrained and people crave that ceremony? No, I think it's just people want that interaction, but they feel like they need an excuse to do it.
Yeah, but why? We, as part of the Humanist Alliance here, we get together on Sundays.
Right.
That's when we record our podcast.
That's just it. I mean, we get together because we can recognize we crave that.
Yeah.
We crave the interaction with each other. We just don't use any reason to do it. We don't any reason. We use reason.
Any ceremony.
We don't use any ceremony. We don't have like it's tradition that we get together and we anoint each other with oil, or we wash each other's feet, or blah 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 blah. We don't need any of that.
But I will say it in communicating with my family, using a language that they're familiar with, even if it's something that I'm not entirely comfortable with, does help and does provide avenues for relationships that may not otherwise be there.
Sure. Well, that's because you're working from them being raised that way.
Yeah.
If you look at the children who were raised without that type of
that would mean nothing to them.
Yeah. But the connection, the need for the connection, that would still be there.
Yeah.
So,
and actually, Neil, I kind of wanted to ask this as well. This is another question I get from people with emails. One that I'm extremely ill-equipped to answer is, how do I raise kids in an interfaith relationship? How do I answer my kids' questions when they say, was Joseph Smith a real prophet or whatever? I think this was kind of the jumping off point was your wife asking you to bear your testimony to your kids and you being completely unable to do it. But I mean, how have things kind of progressed since then? How do you make it work with kids in, an interfaith relationship like this?
I pretty much ignore it. I don't talk about it very much. I share my concerns with my wife. My kids do know where I stand. If they were to ask me if I believe Joseph Smith was a prophet, I would answer them honestly and say, no, I don't. But I wouldn't necessarily go into the reasons why, because, there's still this agreement that my wife and I have that we'll raise the children Mormon. But they know where I stand, and I've come out and I've talked about social things that bother me about the church, and I try to give them nuggets that will get them to think. Not necessarily come out in open disagreement, but rather, here's how I feel, and then you take it and run with it and think for yourself.
And I'll apologize right up front for opening this wound, but is it not really frustrating that you're trying your best to allow your children to think for themselves and everybody else in their lives are not?
Yeah, it's challenging.
Yeah.
It's very challenging.
I mean, anybody who listens to the show kind of knows. Sorry. Go ahead, Bryce.
No, I was just going to say, is that something worth, is that something that your kids recognize as being a good thing? That while, everybody else in their life might be trying to shove a belief system or shove thoughts or, beliefs down their throat, the one person they can come to for honest, unbiased advice is their dad. I mean, it seems like that could be more beneficial to you in the long run.
I think it will be.
Yeah, it makes a huge difference. Our second or third episode of Unequally Yoked, we brought my daughter on, who was questioning the church, and we talked a lot about her. And I challenged my wife. I said, "What happens if your daughter comes to you and says, I've decided that I want to have sex with a boy. How are you going to react?"
Or a girl.
Yeah, and
that's even more important. That's a bigger conversation worth having, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And she, to her credit, Naomi was very. She cried, which I think is perfectly reasonable for a mom to do. But she said, we'll talk about it. We'll talk about protection, and I'll try and be understanding and not shun her, because I think that's the biggest in terms of the gains from my wife's perspective, from where I stand to see what my wife has become. She is a lot more accepting and less judgmental of people, because I have tried to model that behavior of love our kids, love people regardless of where they are. And, Naomi was never very judgmental to begin with, but I think, from seeing that modeled from an outside perspective has opened her eyes or changed her paradigm a little bit more than what she otherwise would have.
Well, just like, we've all met Naomi. She's come to our humanist meetings, and so she actually meets us and knows who we are. It's not like we're, something being preached about that we should be avoided, but she actually knows atheists and that we actually do have good morals.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I mean, she still has an issue with morals without God. She still has a hard time with that.
Right.
But in terms of like a laid back Mormon, if I can't think of a better way to put that. She is
liberal Mormon.
Yeah, she really is. She loves people. She is not. She is as little judgmental as you possibly can be for an LDS person.
Well, it's kind of the broader topic that we were talking about earlier, where in the church, if they come up against something like evolution, that we've been teaching it this way, but we've figured out, we're going to have to fess up that this is not right. Oh, new revelation. Yeah. Boom. And I think that happens with individuals as well. They say, well, there's got to be a way for me to, we call it, and I've talked about this before, it's probably an overused term by me, moving the goalpost. It's okay. Somebody has reached the goal, so to keep them from being able to win, I've got to move. Okay, how am I going to explain this from here? And they just keep making excuses. It's apologetics.
Yeah.
And she's doing that on an individual basis as well.
Yeah.
And trying to make peace with, okay, well, he's making a lot of sense about that. How am I going to reconcile that with myself? So it just keeps going and going. And at what point, I know for me, I was like, I can't move that goalpost anymore. And I've done it so many times. It's got to stop here. And that's the breaking point. And she mentioned on your show several times about what happens if I stop believing? What happens to our show? So there was several things that she said that made me think, she's seeing the conflict.
Yeah.
And I told you guys when y'all first started, I told her to her face, I said, this could be dangerous for you because he's going to make a lot of sense. So,
right. Well, and let me just say, it sounds like Naomi is kind of, the way I initially wanted to describe her is like, she's kind of the exception that proves the rule, right? Where she's, the Mormon church seems to take these very hard stances on things about apostates and about, those damn atheists and what they're going to teach you. They're going to muddy your mind and teach you that the prophet isn't real and whatnot. But, I think more and more I'm seeing this dynamic shift in the membership of the church. It seems like a lot of the members lately don't seem to give half a fuck about what the church says about something. They know where the church stands on something, but they have their own nuanced belief of whatever that might be. And it seems like Naomi is, no longer the exception that is, necessitating the rule, but she's more and more becoming, more mainstream Mormon, whereas it's weird because Mormons now are oftentimes the more mainstream and Salt Lake City Mormons are becoming more and more disconnected from their own leadership, right? The leadership is trying to double down and dig in on things like homophobia and, trying to restrict access for LGBT people to equal rights. But it seems like, Naomi is aligning herself with the majority of what a lot of Mormons believe is, what their belief system is, which is much more liberal, which is much more tolerant, and I think is a really good thing. And the church needs to reform. The church needs to embrace this stuff. And, it's just a matter of time, I think, before they embrace it. But I think it won't be any small task, right? It's going to take some act of Congress or some sort of political and social pressure, which they are starting to come under right now. They're really starting to feel people turn the screws with gay rights and with how they treat apostates and people that are outside of the church. And I think that's good. It's the church has to evolve to accept humanity. Yep. I mean, humanity doesn't need to accept the church anymore. It needs to adapt to what its believers are believing.
And that's definitely one of the biggest red flags for me about religion is that it does have to continue to evolve. But they keep telling you God doesn't change.
Yeah.
But it has to evolve to keep up with progressive.
Well, Catholicism just accepted evolution. So, I mean.
But, it's interesting. Did you ever listen to Mormon Expression, Bryce?
I think I've heard one whole episode of Mormon Expression.
The host of that, John Larson, talked about where he saw the church going, and I can't articulate what he said really well, but he basically the gist was he sees the church as becoming more insular and more conservative, and only the very, very obedient and conservative people lasting, and people like my wife almost being cast out because they don't fit the mold. He sees it as going to this ultra conservative direction where all the liberals are pushed aside, but getting more power as a result of that.
But that's what I totally agree with him, and I think that's embodied in the leadership of the church alone. I think the vast majority of the actual members, they boast a membership of 15 million people. When you actually do the math, it works out to be about 4 to 6 million, somewhere in there. But the vast majority of those people do not hold the beliefs of homophobia that the church leadership does. If you consider the leadership, the vast majority of them are well into their, the second, half of the century of their life, right? Most of them are old white guys, and they grew up during the Red Scare and during so many things, social constructs that are just vestigial at this point, and they're holding on to it and trying to force the church to continue to believe in some of those more ridiculous beliefs. But the more that the people try and separate themselves, who knows, maybe the Salt Lake City church is going to break off of itself and make its own schism, and then the 4 million members that are much more liberal and much more tolerant and accepting are going to just be like, well, I call myself a cultural Mormon the same way a cultural Jew calls himself so. So that's all it ever is. And that's what I consider myself, right? I'm an ex-Mo, I'm a foreman, I'm a former Momo, whatever, but I'm also a cultural Mormon. I still know the Mormon talk. I still understand what Mormonism is. I know a lot about it, but, I don't hold to any of the old beliefs that it has. And, certainly not any of the homophobia or racism that's so deeply ingrained in the doctrine in religious canon.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
It's just is Monson the last surviving person who was alive during the 78 revelation, or were there any other members around at that time?
Good question. I have no idea. I don't even know if he was an apostle. Well, was he an apostle?
I think he was in 60 when he got made an apostle, or 66, 67, somewhere in that time frame.
Okay. So in that case, possibly, because, it's a matter of seniority. Whoever has a seniority of the quorum of the 12, they move up to the president. They're the president of the church. So, he's definitely one of the most, he's definitely the most senior member and one of the oldest in there. But I have to assume that there were plenty of apostles that are still alive now that were called in that interim time from 68 to 78. But, I don't know. I know that they were really waiting for Spencer W. Kimball to knock off in order for that to happen. But I think he died like a year after it came out or something. So.
Yeah, he was, I think he died in 83, 84, because I was a Cub Scout when he died.
Okay, so like 5 years after it came out. But and if I'm not mistaken, there was one apostle, I can't remember his name, but they actually held the vote for the giving the blacks a priesthood when he was out of town, because they knew no matter what, he was not going to give unanimous consensus. And that's what's required for any vote in the Quorum of the 12, is it has to be completely unanimous. So they held that vote while he was out of town because he was never going to let it pass.
Huh. Anyway, sorry about the Mormon talk. You guys can start asking questions again.
So is there any chance for a woman to become a priest yet?
No.
Go to the Community of Christ. They've had that since like the 1970s or 1980s. They've had women church leaders, women that are members of the Quorum of the 12 in the 70. They've accepted gays into the as part of just the normal church since like the 50s. I mean, they gave the blacks a priesthood since the 50s. I mean, the Community of Christ is just what Emma Smith started with Joseph Smith III after Joseph died. And that's, they are the very liberal version of the LDS church. And it shows they don't have financial holdings. They don't have any of the clout. They don't have the membership numbers, but they're much more tolerant and much smarter about how they run their church.
They still have revelations, actually.
Yeah, I think they have like 193 sections or something now. It's amazing.
Well, it sounds like if the LDS was actually become a little bit more liberal, you probably would have a lot less Mormon Mormons.
Yeah, and
that's the thing. Like that's something I hit on in my show occasionally. It's like, if the Community of Christ could do this, if they could reform massively and still survive and retain membership, obviously the Salt Lake City Mormon Church could do it. They just won't. They won't, because it's run by a bunch of crusty old white guys.
I don't think the Salt Lake City Church could reform that far. I think they would, because if they became more liberal, they'd lose. I don't think people would be as willing to pay tithing. I think
yes, but I think the vast majority of the membership they would lose if they went through a vast set of reforms. Most of the people they would lose are people that are going to die within the next decade or two anyway. But they would increase the younger generation. They would bring in people like me that, don't agree with their older tenants, but say, oh, well, they're reforming to be more liberal and more accepting. Hey, that's a place that I can go every Sunday and talk with my friends. That would be great. Whether or not they believe in God, that shouldn't matter. If it's a place where we can all gather together and have the same conversation
over a coffee,
that's fantastic. Coffee over a beer. Amazing.
Exactly.
You talk about the Community of Christ, and They have basically said you don't have to believe in God. The Book of Mormon probably isn't real, but you can accept it or reject it. The Book of Abraham is definitely false. I mean, they've basically taken the culture of being a Mormon and that's about it. All your beliefs are up to you. We just want you to have a place where you can come every Sunday and meet.
Wow. So it's the Unitarians of Mormonism.
I was going to say they're the LDSUs.
Right.
And they actually invite speakers that commonly speak at UU churches to come in and speak at their Community of Christ congregations. I mean, they're so much more open and accepting. And I mean, that just goes to the same thing that I said earlier. It's like the church could do it. I mean, this is part of the growing pains of the LDS church. It could do it and survive and still hold on to its, $60 billion of financial assets, and they could still do it and survive. They aren't willing. I mean, there's a way, but there just isn't a will to do it, and it's a huge problem.
Yeah.
Well, we've kind of hit our limit with this show, but this is such an interesting topic. If you guys are interested, I'd love to do a part 2.
Yeah.
And continue the conversation.
And then we get in more into the history of it.
Yeah, get into the history, talk a little more. Of course, my major concern is, because you're my friend, Neil, is your welfare and what's going on with you and how can I help you? I know that things are tough for you, that with your wife still being a believer and your children and everything, it's a tough position to be in. I don't envy that at all. So I just hope you always understand that we're here for you. Anything we can do to help the Humanist Group, the Atheist Avengers, promoting secular feminism, anybody is here for you. Okay.
Now that you just gave a shout out to my wife's podcast.
Yeah, well, she's sitting over there staring at me, so I thought maybe I'd plug her a little bit. She'll call me out if I don't. But Bryce, we want to thank you for being our guest, and like I said, we'd love to have you back sometime. Would you want to give a little bit of plug of about your podcast and about what you've got going on?
Yeah, I'd love to. I'd love to come on and talk more history. That's I seriously cannot shut up about that stuff, and that's why I made a podcast about it. That's the Naked Mormonism podcast. I call it the Serial Mormon History Podcast because episode 1 starts with the birth of Joseph Smith, and now episode 30 something or other is talking about 1835. So it just takes a linear progression of the chronology of the Mormon Church and the biggest events. And then I have a second podcast, which is called the Glass Box Podcast. And that's where we read books that were possible source texts for the Book of Mormon and point out the similarities between those and the Book of Mormon. Similar phrasing, similar content, and books that were written before the Book of Mormon, possibly available to Joseph Smith or Sidney Rigdon or whoever else helped Joseph collaborate with to make the Book of Mormon. So, yeah, that's where you can find me. iTunes, Stitcher for both of those, Naked Mormonism and the Glassbox Podcast, Facebook, Twitter, all of those fun stuffs, and or just Google search. You can find me there. Bryce Blankenagel.
Hey,
and don't try and spell the name.
Can I ask you one other question, Bryce? I mean, I'm still in your backlog of Naked Mormonism, but I've been listening to you and David Michael on My Book of Mormon. Did you quit your regular job and are now writing a book? Can you talk a little bit about that, if that's what the case is?
Yeah. So I actually did a GoFundMe, which was it was titled 6 Months, 2 Books. And I set that title out long before I knew how much work it is to put a book together. So I'm in the process of writing 2 books at the moment. And what I'm actually going to start doing very soon, after I'm done with a huge transition phase that's going on in my life, helping I'm moving and helping my parents move. I'm going to be locked down for the next 3 or 4 weeks. But after that is done, I'm going to start every other week releasing a chapter of the book that I'm working on right now, focusing on it and opening it up just for the internet to peer review, basically. So, if there's any infactualities in it or anything that needs to be corrected, I can get those corrected before it goes to mass publishing. And then, hopefully it will all kind of stem from there. But yeah, that's all down the pike in a little bit. But there are currently 2 books in the works.
Well, we'll definitely be looking forward to those.
Absolutely.
Very cool. All right. Me too.
All right, and just one more time, we will be putting the Unequally Yoked back up on our Spreaker on Reason Alliance Media. Neil has given us permission to do that, and thank you for that, because I really believe in the message that you guys had and the help that it can give to people. So I think it's important that we have those back episodes archived for listening pleasure. So,
well, I've got a dulcet voice too, so
right.
People love to hear me talk.
Yeah, okay.
You love to hear yourself talk.
That's true.
I'm damn near asleep already, like a lullaby.
Well, I won't tell you.
I'm gonna check that out. I'm excited to hear that because I'm sure there's a lot of information in there that I could use too. So Unequally Yoked, I'm gonna look that up.
Yep, we'll have it on Spreaker very, very soon. I guess we'll sign off for today. Thank you guys for being here, and like I said, we'll pick this conversation up later. Major Mac, you got anything else?
No, the only thing I have to say is thank you guys for being here today and teaching us a little bit about Mormonism, because this is a new field of religion for me as well. I've read some stuff. I know a little bit about the history, but the people themselves I know nothing about.
Yeah.
I am truly amazed that every single time I sit down and talk with someone about Mormonism, I learned something new.
Exactly.
And today it was about 10 different new things. But there's so much to it.
Yeah.
And people just don't even realize. So yeah, it's a conversation ongoing. But okay. So this is the Atheist Avengers, and we will see you guys next time.
The chances are, even if we all accept Jesus at this point, you, me, and our entire families will probably still wind up in hell. But at least we'll be in good fucking company.
Very nice.